They used my birthday cake as a centerpiece for their business deal. That was the moment I understood exactly where I stood in my own son's life. It was a Saturday evening in late October, and the house smelled of catered food I had not been asked about. My son Marcus had told me weeks before that he was planning something special for my 70th birthday. Spécial. I held that word carefully. The way you hold something fragile, turning it over, checking for cracks. I should have checked more carefully. When I arrived at the house I had helped him purchase 6 years ago, the driveway was full of cars I did not recognize. Men in sport coats stood near the kitchen island with drinks in their hands, laughing at something on a phone. Women in heels clicked across the hardwood floors I had once helped him refinish. A banner stretched across the dining room wall. It read, in gold letters, Harvest Properties Building Tomorrow Together. Not Happy Birthday, Ruth. Not 70 Years of Grace. Just a company slogan for a gathering I had not been invited to plan. Marcus appeared from the crowd with the energy of a man who had already forgotten why he was supposed to be nervous. He kissed my cheek quickly, the way you kiss an obligation. Mom, you look great. Come in, come in. There are some people I want you to meet. Before I could respond, he had already turned back toward a man in a gray blazer, hand extended, smile widened, fully elsewhere. Vanessa materialized beside me with a glass of sparkling water. Here you go, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. The food is in the dining room. Make yourself comfortable. Then she glided away toward the kitchen, with the purposeful calm of a woman managing an event she had designed entirely without me. I stood in the entrance of my son's home, holding a glass of water I had not asked for, listening to people discuss quarterly projections and zoning variances at my birthday party. My granddaughter Zoe found me near the bookshelf in the living room, where I had retreated with a small plate of food and nowhere particular to sit. She was 14, angular and observant in the way of children who have learned to read rooms quickly. She squeezed my hand without saying anything at first, which told me she had already understood what I was still processing. Grandma, she said quietly, I told Dad this was wrong. Her voice was low, careful, the voice of someone who had already tried and failed to change something. He said you wouldn't mind, that you liked being around people. I set my plate down on the shelf beside a framed photo of Marcus at his college graduation. I was standing beside him in that photo, hand on his shoulder, both of us squinting into the sun. I always minded, I said softly. I just never said so. The party continued around us for another 2 hours. At one point, someone dimmed the lights and brought out a cake. For a moment, my heart lifted. The small, involuntary lift of a child who still expects to be remembered. But the cake said Harvest Properties in the same gold lettering as the banner. Someone had ordered it as a promotional piece. It was sliced and distributed to the guests without ceremony, without candles, without my name on a single crumb. Marcus caught my eye from across the room. He raised his glass slightly in my direction. Something meant to pass as acknowledgement. I raised mine back. Something meant to pass as acceptance. I drove home alone on streets that were quiet the way October nights are quiet, a settled hush that feels older than the season. My hands were steady on the wheel. My chest was not. The house I had lived in for 31 years greeted me the way it always did, with the particular silence of a place that has absorbed decades of a life. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, the one my late husband Gerald had installed the first winter we moved in. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and sat down at the table where I had once balanced a teacher's salary against a mortgage, 2 college funds, and Gerald's medical bills during his last 2 years. Numbers had been the language of my survival. I was not a financial controller like some women I had known. I was a high school math teacher who had learned, out of necessity, to treat her household like a ledger. Every column had to balance. Every entry had to mean something. The kettle began to hiss, and I let my eyes rest on the kitchen drawer to my right. Inside that drawer, beneath the takeout menus and the extra set of keys and the small notepad Gerald used for grocery lists, was a folder. I had not opened it in several weeks, but I knew its contents the way you know the contents of something you have tried not to think about. I opened the drawer. I opened the folder. The top document was a bank statement for an account I shared with Marcus, one we had set up years ago after Gerald died so Marcus could help manage household emergencies if I was ever unable to. It had seemed sensible at the time, practical, the kind of arrangement that signals trust between a mother and an adult son. The statement showed 3 withdrawals I did not make, not large enough to alarm a casual glance, just under the threshold that might trigger a notification. But I was a math teacher for 34 years. I noticed numbers. I sat very still. Below the bank statement was a letter I had received 2 weeks earlier and set aside because I did not know what to do with it. It was from a title company, a courtesy notice regarding a refinancing inquiry on my property. My property. The home Gerald and I had paid off together, the deed to which sat in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet. The inquiry had been initiated by someone with access to my personal information, including my social security number and the address and parcel identification of my home. I read the letter again. Then I read it a third time. My name was on that deed alone. Had been for 3 years, since Gerald passed, and we completed the transfer. No one had the right to initiate an inquiry on that property without my knowledge. No one had my social security number except my accountant, my doctor's billing office, and my son, who had needed it years ago to add me to his health insurance plan before I qualified for Medicare. The kettle had gone fully quiet. I had not poured the water. I sat at the table for a long time, not in shock, not in tears, in the particular stillness that arrives when something you suspected becomes something you can no longer pretend not to know. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across my kitchen wall and disappearing. I thought about all the years I had helped, the down payment on the house, $40,000 I had saved carefully, given freely, and never mentioned again because Marcus had asked me not to bring it up around Vanessa. The business loan when Harvest Properties was still a dream on a napkin, $22,000 I had pulled from the retirement account I was not supposed to touch for 3 more years and paid a penalty on. The quarterly injections into his operating account, when the market softened and his commissions thinned and Vanessa's preferred life did not adjust accordingly. I had never kept a running total. I had told myself that was generosity, that love does not keep a ledger. But sitting at that table with the bank statement and the title company letter spread before me, I understood that someone had been keeping a ledger on my behalf, quietly, incrementally, in the language of access and assumption. I was not being asked for help anymore. I was being harvested. I closed the folder. I put it back in the drawer. I poured the water over the tea bag and waited for it to steep, and then I went to bed. Not because I was finished. Because I needed to be clear-eyed by morning. I woke at 4:30 without an alarm, which was not unusual. At 70, sleep becomes a negotiation rather than a certainty. I lay still for several minutes, listening to the house, to the distant sound of a neighbor's sprinkler system and the occasional passing of a car on the main road 2 blocks over. Then I rose, dressed carefully, and retrieved the folder from the kitchen drawer. I also retrieved the fireproof box from the bedroom closet and confirmed that the deed was where it had always been, intact, undisturbed, still bearing only my name. Whatever the title company inquiry had been, it had not yet progressed. I had gotten there first. I was at the bank when it opened at 9. I had called ahead and asked specifically for the branch manager, a woman named Patricia Osei, whom I had dealt with once before when Gerald's estate was being settled. She had been precise and kind in equal measure, which is a rare combination, and one I had not forgotten. She rose to greet me when I entered her office, her expression shifting from professional welcome to attentive concern within the first moment of seeing my face. "Ruth," she said, "what can I do for you?" I placed the folder on her desk and explained, clearly and without rushing, what I had found. The unauthorized withdrawals, the title company inquiry, the shared account and its history. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, then turned to her screen and began pulling records. The withdrawals, she confirmed, had originated from a linked device, not a branch visit. Someone with digital access to the shared account had initiated them. She looked at me carefully. The account was set up with joint access. Legally, either party could make withdrawals. But she also noted that the device used was not one I had ever registered. "I want to remove the secondary account holder," I said. "Today, if possible." She nodded. "We can do that. It will require some paperwork, and there may be a brief processing window, but yes." She paused. "Ruth, I also want to flag something." She turned her screen slightly toward me. "There was an inquiry made to our mortgage division last month regarding your home address. A preliminary conversation about refinancing options, initiated by someone who identified themselves as your financial representative." "I do not have a financial representative," I said. "I know that now," she said quietly. "The inquiry didn't advance because the caller couldn't provide the secondary verification we require, but I want you to know it happened. And I want you to consider placing a security freeze on your credit profile through the 3 major bureaus. Today, we spent the next hour and 15 minutes working through every account, every linked access, every automatic transfer. Patricia was methodical and unhurried, the way people are when they understand the weight of what they are doing. By the time we finished, the shared account had been converted to sole ownership. The automatic transfers that had been drawing from my savings into an account I now recognized as the Harvest Properties Operating Fund had been halted. New security measures were in place. A fraud flag had been added to my credit file at my request. When I stepped outside, the morning air was cool and carrying a faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere in the neighborhood. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not moving, just breathing. The sun was still low and pale, more suggestion than certainty. I had parked 2 blocks away, and I walked slowly, feeling the pavement under my feet, feeling the particular steadiness of a person who has just done something they should have done much earlier. My phone had been on silent. When I turned it over, there were no messages. Not yet. That changed by noon. I was sitting in the small sunroom off the back of my house, drinking my second cup of tea and reading, when the buzzing began. First, Marcus. "Mom, something is wrong with the business account. Can you call me?" Then again. Minutes later, more urgent. "Mom, I'm serious. There's a problem." Then a third message, with no words, just a string of question marks that somehow communicated more panic than sentences. Vanessa's message came next, and it was not a question. It was a declaration. "Ruth, whatever you think you're doing, you need to fix this immediately. Marcus has a closing this afternoon, and his operating account is frozen. This is not acceptable." I set the phone face down on the cushion beside me and turned the page of my book. The sun had moved enough to warm my feet through the glass. A cardinal landed briefly on the fence outside and then lifted away. I let the buzzing accumulate. By 2 o'clock, the car was in the driveway. I watched from the sunroom window as Marcus got out first, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw set in the tight way it had been since adolescence, whenever he encountered an obstacle he believed he should not have to navigate. Vanessa followed, her movements carrying the specific energy of someone who has spent the drive over rehearsing a speech. I met them at the front door before they knocked. "I want to talk," Marcus said. His voice was controlled, but barely. "Then come in," I said. They sat on the living room couch, though sad is generous. Marcus was forward on the cushion, elbows on his knees. Vanessa remained upright with the posture of someone who refuses to settle into an uncomfortable situation, which I suppose was accurate. "The operating account is inaccessible," Marcus said. "Do you understand what that means? I had a closing at 3, a commission I've been working toward for 4 months. The client called and said the wire didn't go through." He looked at me with an expression I recognized from when he was a boy and had broken something he thought could be hidden. Except now the expression was not shame, it was accusation. I looked at him steadily. "I made some changes this morning." "What kind of changes?" "I removed your access to my accounts." "All of them." Vanessa inhaled sharply. "Ruth, those transfers were helping us manage cash flow. We were going to pay everything back when the quarter closed." I turned to her. "I want to ask you something, and I want a direct answer. Did Marcus initiate an inquiry about refinancing my home?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Vanessa looked at her hands. Marcus looked at the window. "It was just preliminary," he said finally. "I wasn't going to do anything without talking to you first. But you didn't talk to me first. You initiated the inquiry first." "I was going to explain the situation," he said. "We've been managing some debt, and the house has equity. It made financial sense to at least explore." "My name is the only name on that deed," I said. "There is no we in that equity. There is only me." Marcus leaned back. He rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man who is exhausted by the consequences of his own choices. "You can't just freeze everything, Mom. We have obligations. Lily's school tuition is due next week. The insurance is on autopay from that account. Then you will need to find another way to pay those things," I said. "The same way most families do." Vanessa stood up. "This is unbelievable. Do you know how much we have managed for you over the years? The calls, the errands, the time we put in." I let that sentence rest in the air of my living room for a moment. I wanted to hear it fully. I wanted to make sure I had understood it correctly. I kept my voice even. "I would like you to tell me the name of one errand you ran for me in the last calendar year. One phone call on my behalf. One afternoon spent sitting with me." She opened her mouth and closed it again. I continued. "I can tell you what I have done. I can tell you the specific amounts, the specific dates, and the specific accounts from which they came. I have kept records, not to use against you, but because I was raised to understand that numbers tell the truth even when people don't." Marcus looked up. His expression had changed. The accusation was gone. Something quieter and less comfortable had taken its place. The front door opened with the soft sound of someone who has practiced entering a room without disturbing it. Zoe stepped inside, backpack over one shoulder, reading the room the way she always did, quickly and completely. "I told her to wait in the car," Vanessa said. Zoe looked at me instead of her mother. "Grandma, I need to tell you something." "Zoe?" Vanessa said again, sharper. Zoe kept her eyes on me. "Last week, when you were at church, Dad was on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen, but he said, once the deed is in a trust he controls, he can move her into assisted living and sell the house. He said you'd be taken care of, and that was the same as asking." The room became very still. Marcus's face had gone the color of old paper. Vanessa turned toward the window. Neither of them spoke. I looked at my granddaughter, who was standing in my living room with her backpack still on her shoulder, eyes bright and frightened and absolutely certain. She had told the truth in a room full of people who had been choosing not to. "Thank you," I said to her. "I mean that." She nodded once and sat down in the armchair by the window, and no one told her to leave again. "Marcus," I said, and he looked at me the way he had not looked at me in years, without the performance, without the management. "I am not angry with you. I want you to understand that. But I am finished. I am finished absorbing the cost of choices you make without asking me. I am finished being the solution to problems I was not consulted about. And I am finished allowing you to treat my home, my savings, and my future as resources that belong to your plans. He swallowed. Mom, I am not finished, I said, not unkindly. You are my son, and I love you. That has not changed, and it will not change. But love is not a blank check. It never was. I simply forgot for too long to say so out loud. Vanessa left without speaking. She walked out the front door, and I heard the car door close behind her. Marcus stayed. He sat on the couch with his hands between his knees, and for a long time he said nothing, and I let him not say anything, because sometimes the quiet is necessary before the words can mean what they need to mean. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than I had heard it in years. How long have I been doing this? I considered the question. Long enough that you stopped noticing you were doing it. He pressed his eyes shut. I told myself it was different. That you wanted to help. That it wasn't the same as taking. Wanting to help and being taken from can look the same from the outside, I said. But they feel very different from where I was standing. He looked up at me with an expression that was not yet repair, but was at least the beginning of wanting to attempt it. I'm sorry, Mom. Not for the account or the closing. For all of it. For the birthday. For the way we've treated you. I accepted that. Not fully, not immediately, but I let it in. You have a daughter in that chair, I said, nodding toward Zoe, who had been sitting quietly with her hands folded, watching us. She told the truth today when it would have been much easier to stay quiet. Whatever else happens between us, you should know that she is the best of what you could have taught, and somehow she learned it anyway. Marcus turned to look at his daughter. Something crossed his face that was too complicated to name. He left a little while later, quieter than he had arrived. I walked him to the door, but did not stand on the porch and watch him go. I simply closed the door gently and stood in my front hallway, listening to the house settle around me. Zoe had asked if she could stay for a little while, and I had said yes. We sat at the kitchen table, and I made hot chocolate, which I kept in the cabinet specifically because she had liked it since she was small, and we did not talk about any of what had happened. We talked about her history project, and the book she was reading, and the way the oak tree in my backyard had turned almost entirely orange in the last week. She left at dinner time, hugging me at the door longer than usual. I love you, Grandma, she said into my shoulder. You are my greatest blessing, I told her. And I meant it, in the specific way that you mean something when you have just been reminded of it. I spent the following morning at the office of an estate attorney named Carl Whitmore, whom I had been referred to by a colleague from my teaching days who had used him when her husband passed. His office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and the waiting room had the particular quiet dignity of a place where serious decisions are made without drama. Carl Whitmore was in his 60s, unhurried, with the manner of a man who had learned to let silences develop without filling them prematurely. He listened to my situation in full before he wrote a single note. When I finished, he folded his hands. You want to update your estate plan and protect the property? Yes, I said, and I want to ensure that if anything were to happen to me, the decisions about my care and my home are made by someone I trust. He nodded. We can establish a revocable living trust with you as sole trustee during your lifetime. Full control, full access. No one can touch it without your direction. We can also establish a durable power of attorney for healthcare and finances, designating someone of your choosing. He looked at me over his glasses. Do you have someone in mind? I thought of Zoe, who was 14 and too young by law. I thought of my sister in Raleigh, my younger sister Diane, who was practical and plain-spoken and had never once asked me for anything. My sister, I said. Diane Caldwell. He wrote the name. And for the estate itself, the beneficiary? I would like to establish an educational trust for my granddaughter Zoe, I said, to be released in increments for her education, and, when she turns 25, whatever remains. He wrote again. And your son? I considered the question carefully, the way he deserved it to be considered. I would like to leave him a letter. Not assets. A letter. With the explanation he should have had from me years ago. Carl looked at me steadily. That's entirely within your rights. I know, I said. It's also the right thing. We worked through the documents for 2 hours. At no point did I feel rushed or dramatic. I felt, in fact, the opposite of dramatic. I felt the clean, uncomplicated satisfaction of a ledger that has finally been brought into balance. When I stepped out of the building, the afternoon light had gone soft and golden the way it does in late October when the days are shortening and the sun angles lower. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. A group of pigeons moved across the plaza in front of me with the focused indifference of creatures who have never spent a single moment doubting their right to occupy space. I walked to my car smiling at them. 2 days passed without word from Marcus. One evening, a text arrived from Vanessa, short and stripped of its earlier entitlement. It said only, I want to apologize for how I've spoken to you. I know that doesn't fix anything. I wrote back a single line. I appreciate that. Then I set the phone down and returned to the novel I had been neglecting for 2 weeks. On the third morning, my phone lit up with a message from Marcus. Mom, I've been thinking. I talked to a financial advisor yesterday on my own about getting our actual finances in order. Not using yours, just ours. He paused in the way people pause when texting, then continued, I want to take you to dinner. No business, no other people, just us. And Zoe if she wants to come. No agenda, just dinner. I held the phone and read it twice. Then I typed back, next Sunday. You pick the place. Somewhere quiet. He replied within a minute, I know just the spot. And I'll call ahead about the menu this time. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the backyard, at the oak tree Zoe and I had talked about, which had now given up most of its leaves, and stood bare-limbed and uncomplicated against the pale November sky. There was something I had always liked about trees in that stage, after the performance of color, before the return of green. Just the true shape of the thing, without decoration. That morning I walked. Not a purposeful walk, not exercise as obligation, just movement. Through a neighborhood I had lived in long enough to know the names of every dog, and the approximate schedules of the mail carriers, and which houses put out their porch lights at dusk, and which ones leave them off. I walked 6 blocks and turned at the park and came back along the street where the sidewalk has a raised section from a tree root that everyone in the neighborhood knows to step over. I stepped over it. At 70, I have learned that the days do not slow down as a gift. They slow down as an instruction. Pay attention, they say. This is the part that matters. I had spent too many years in the background of my own life. Not because anyone had put me there by force, but because I had retreated there willingly, quietly, one accommodation at a time, believing that making myself smaller was the same as being generous. I understand now that those are not the same thing. Generosity chooses to give. Disappearing is something else. My home belongs to me. My savings belong to me. My time and my dignity and the remaining years I intend to live well, those belong to me too. I do not need permission to protect them. I needed only the clarity to understand they were worth protecting. That clarity did not arrive in a single moment. It arrived the way most important things do, quietly, during a long drive home on a cool October night, when I sat in my car outside a house lit by party lights that had nothing to do with me, and understood that the version of myself I had been maintaining for other people's comfort was one I could no longer afford to keep. I have a granddaughter who told the truth in a room full of people choosing silence. I have a sister in Raleigh who answers the phone on the second ring. I have a kitchen table where I sat with Gerald for 30 years and solved every problem we were given, and I can sit at it still. I have a life that is mine again. That, I have learned, is more than enough to start with. Before you go, I would love to know, what is one boundary you wish you had set sooner, and which city are you watching from today?